What's the first thing that comes to mind when I say Chevy 350? Reliability? Versatility? How about the engine that accidentally revolutionized everything from boats to airplanes? Never heard of that part? What if I told you this humble V8 has more secrets than a CIA black site, and some of them are absolutely bonkers? The Chevy 350 small block has always fascinated me. I'm not entirely sure why, to be honest. Maybe because it's in literally everything. Maybe because it's so simple yet so brilliant. Or maybe because the story behind it is filled with more plot twists than a soap opera. But here's the thing. Everyone knows the 350 is popular. What they don't know is why it exists at all. And trust me, that story involves corporate espionage, a mathematical accident, and a guy who thought putting truck parts in a sports car was a good idea. So with that out of the way, let's start with something that'll blow your mind. The 350 wasn't supposed to be 350 cubic inches, not even close. The original plan called for 352 cubic inches, but a last-minute change in bore spacing meant they had to shrink it down. That 2 cubic inch difference? Turns out it was the best mistake GM ever made. The slightly smaller displacement meant better rod angles, which meant less side loading on the cylinder walls, which meant these things could run forever. Sometimes the best engineering happens by accident. Now check this out. The very first 350 wasn't built by Chevrolet. Yeah, you heard that right. It was actually assembled in a Buick factory in Flint, Michigan, because Chevy's Tonawanda plant wasn't ready yet. Imagine being a Buick guy in 1967 building what would become the most iconic Chevy engine ever. The irony is delicious. Even better? Some of those Buick-built 350s ended up in Camaros that were street racing Buick Grand Sports. Talk about playing both sides. Here's where things get interesting. The 350's bore and stroke, 4.0 inches by 3.48 inches, weren't chosen for performance reasons. They were picked because they perfectly matched existing tooling from the 327. GM basically said, what if we just made the 327 bigger but used all the same machines? Lazy? Maybe. Genius? Absolutely. This meant production costs stayed low, parts interchangeability went through the roof, and suddenly every machine shop in America could work on these things. But wait, there's more. The original 350 block design included provisions for a dry sump oil system. Yes, dry sump. On a passenger car engine. Why? Because the engineers thought they might use it in the Corvette race program. They never did, but those cast-in mounting bosses are still there on every single 350 block made through 1969. Some hot rodders actually discovered them in the 80s and started building their own dry sump systems. GM accidentally future-proofed their design without meaning to. You're probably thinking, okay, but everyone knows the 350 is reliable. Sure, but do you know why? It's not just the bottom-end strength, though the mains are beefy as hell. The real secret is the cylinder wall thickness. The 350 has thicker cylinder walls than the 327 despite having a bigger bore. How's that possible? GM used a different casting technique that allowed for closer cylinder spacing while maintaining wall thickness. This is why you can bore a 350 out to 383 cubic inches without problems, while a 327 starts getting sketchy after .030 over. Speaking of which, the 383 stroker, that magical combination of a 400 crank in a 350 block, was discovered completely by accident. A guy in Texas in 1978 blew up his 350 and could only find a 400 crank at the junkyard. His machine shop buddy said, might as well try it. And boom, the most popular small block stroker combo was born. GM engineers later admitted they'd never even considered this combination during development. Sometimes the best innovations come from broke guys with junkyards. Now, here's something that'll make your head spin. The 350 was used in aircraft. I mean, come on, who puts a Chevy small block in an airplane? Turns out, quite a few people. There's an STC, that's Supplemental Type Certificate, For you non-aviation nerds, that allows 350s to replace Continental 0470s in certain Cessnas. The conversion saves about 200 pounds and adds 50 horsepower. The only problem was cooling, but they solved that with a gear reduction drive and a massive composite prop. There are literally Cessna 182s flying around with Chevy power right now. Meanwhile, in the marine world, the 350 became so dominant that Mercury Marine just gave up trying to compete and started buying bare blocks from GM. They'd add their own marine-specific parts and sell them as Mercury engines. Their engineers literally said, if you can't beat them, rebadge them. Even today, most stern drive boats under 30 feet are running some variant of the 350. The saltwater ones last about 10 years, the freshwater ones basically forever. Oh, and did I mention the industrial applications? The 350 powered everything from airport ground support equipment to oil field generators. There's a specific variant called the ZZ4 Industrial that's been in continuous production since 1991. Same exact engine, 30-plus years. They're still making them today because nothing else can match the combination of power, durability, and parts availability. Some oil rigs in the Gulf have 350s that have been running non-stop since the Clinton administration. But here's where it gets really weird. GM made a reverse rotation Marine 350. Think about that for a second. They flipped the cam profile, changed the distributor gear, and reversed the oil pump rotation. Why? For twin-engine boats, where you want counter-rotating props, the crazy part is these reverse rotation engines use 90% of the same parts as regular 350s. Try doing that with any modern engine. You can't. The 350's interchangeability is honestly mind-blowing. A camshaft from a 1967 327 will drop right into a 2002 Vortec 350. Pistons from a 1969 Corvette will fit in a 1995 Caprice cop car. Connecting rods are completely interchangeable across 40 years of production. This isn't by accident. GM deliberately kept the architecture the same because they knew mechanics would lose their minds if they changed it. Incidentally, this is why the LS engine had such a hard time gaining acceptance at first. Mechanics were so used to everything being interchangeable on small blocks that when the LS came out with its completely different architecture, guys literally refused to work on them. It took about 5 years before shops started warming up to the LS, and even now, some old-timers insist the 350 is superior simply because you can fix it with a hammer and a prayer. Let's talk about the Vortec heads for a minute. When GM introduced them in 1996, they claimed a 40 horsepower increase from cylinder heads alone. Everyone called bullshit. Turns out they were underselling it. The Vortec heads actually added closer to 50 horsepower on a mild engine and up to 70 on a built motor. The secret? They accidentally discovered that a specific heart-shaped combustion chamber created perfect swirl patterns. They were trying to improve emissions and stumbled onto massive power gains. The problem was, those same Vortec heads had a fatal flaw. The valve guide bosses were too thin, and they'd crack if you ran more than 480 lift on your cam. GM knew about this during development, but figured nobody would run that much cam in a truck engine. They apparently forgot that hot rodders exist. By 1997, the aftermarket had already developed fixes, including bronze guideliners and screw-in studs. GM's response? They just kept making them the same way because the trucks didn't need the upgrade. You want to know something even crazier? The 350 was almost discontinued in 1982. Dead serious. GM's board of directors wanted to kill it in favor of the new 4.3 V6, which was literally a 350 with 2 cylinders chopped off. The only reason it survived was because the truck division threw an absolute fit. They argued that farmers and contractors would riot if they couldn't get V8 trucks. The board caved, and the 350 lived on for another 20 years. Imagine if they'd actually killed it. Furthermore, that 4.3 V6, It used so many 350 parts that rebuilders started creating hybrid engines. They'd take a 4.3 block, add 350 pistons and rods, and create these weird displacement variants that GM never intended. There's a guy in Tennessee who built a 4.8-liter V6 using 350 internals that made 400 horsepower, naturally aspirated. GM engineers later admitted they were impressed and slightly concerned that people were basically designing new engines from their parts bin. Here's something that'll blow your mind about production numbers. GM made approximately 100 million small block V8s between 1955 and 2003. Of those, roughly 40 million were 350s. That means there are more 350s than there are people in Canada. Actually, there are more 350s than there are people in California. Hell, if 350s were people, they'd be the 37th largest country on Earth. That's insane production volume for a single engine design. The racing history is equally bonkers. The 350 has won more races across more racing disciplines than any other engine in history. NASCAR, NHRA, SCCA, offshore powerboat racing, tractor pulling, even airplane racing. Yes, airplane racing. The Reno Air Races had a class specifically for 350 powered biplanes. They'd turn 5,000 RPM at full throttle and sound absolutely mental. The class was eventually discontinued because the engines were too reliable and nobody could gain an advantage. Speaking of racing, here's a secret NASCAR doesn't want you to know. When they mandated the car of tomorrow in 2007, teams were supposed to use spec engines. But several top teams figured out that early 1970s 350 blocks had slightly different metallurgy that responded better to their heat treatment process. They were buying up old 350 cores from junkyards and using 40-year-old blocks in brand-new race cars. NASCAR eventually caught on and banned pre-1991 blocks, but not before several championships were won with disco-era castings. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the LS engine. Everyone says the LS replaced the 350, but that's not entirely true. GM kept making 350s until 2003, 4 years after the LS1 debuted. Why? Because the 350 was still cheaper to produce and plenty of customers specifically wanted them. Fleet buyers especially insisted on 350s because their mechanics knew them inside and out. Some police departments actually rejected LS-powered Tahoes and demanded 350-powered models instead. The transition period created some truly weird variants. There were 2,000 model year trucks that could have either a 350 Vortec or a 4.8 LS, depending on which plant built them. Same truck, same options, completely different engines. Dealers had no idea which engine they were getting until the truck showed up. Customers would specifically request one or the other, leading to bizarre situations where identical trucks sat side by side with different engines. Additionally, the 350's influence on the LS is bigger than most people realize. The LS bore spacing is exactly the same as the 350, 4.4 inches. Why? Because GM already had billions of dollars worth of machinery set up for that spacing. The LS might be a clean sheet design, but it's standing on the 350's shoulders. Even the bell housing bolt pattern is the same, which is why you can bolt an LS to a transmission from 1962. But here's my favorite 350 secret, the Mexican connection. GM's Toluca plant in Mexico kept making 350s until 2004, a full year after U.S. production ended. But these weren't normal 350s. They had roller cams, one-piece rear main seals, and powder-forged rods. Basically, they were building hot rod 350s from the factory. These engines were only sold in Mexico and Latin America, but hot rodders started importing them because they were basically blueprinted engines for the price of a stocker. The crate engine program is another wild story. GM Performance Parts sold more 350 crate engines than original equipment 350s in some years during the 1990s. Think about that. They were selling more engines to hot rodders than to people who needed replacement motors. The profit margins were so good that GM kept an entire production line running just for crate engines. Some GM executives joke that they were a crate engine company that happened to sell cars. You're probably asking, what about the legendary reliability? Well, here's something most people don't know. The 350's bottom end is so overbuilt that GM detuned them from the factory. A stock 350 bottom end can handle 500 horsepower without breaking a sweat. The connecting rods are good for 6,500 RPM stock. The crank can take 7,000 RPM all day long. GM built them this strong because they were paranoid about warranty claims, but hot rodders figured this out quick. You can literally double the horsepower without touching the bottom end. All right, story time. In 1988, a guy named Mike Bowling put a twin-turbo 350 in a Chevette and ran 8s in the quarter mile. The engine made somewhere around 1,500 horsepower. The block? Completely stock, pulled from a junkyard Suburban. The crank? Stock. Rods? Stock. The only internal modifications were forged pistons and better rod bolts. That engine survived dozens of 8-second passes before finally splitting a cylinder wall. The fact that a passenger car engine from the 70s could handle that abuse is absolutely ridiculous. The 350's simplicity is what made it legendary. No variable valve timing, no direct injection, no cylinder deactivation, no complicated electronics. Just air, fuel, and spark. This simplicity meant shade tree mechanics could rebuild them on their garage floor. Try that with a modern engine. You need $50,000 in special tools just to change the oil on some new cars. A 350? You can rebuild it with hand tools and determination. This brings us to the parts availability situation, which is honestly comical. You can build an entire 350 without a single GM part. The aftermarket has reproduced literally everything: blocks, cranks, heads, even the freeze plugs. There are companies whose entire business model is making 350 parts. Co-MP Cams probably sends the 350 a Christmas card every year thanking it for keeping them in business. Oh, and the sound. Everyone knows the small block Chevy rumble, but do you know why it sounds that way? It's the firing order, 18436-572. This creates a specific exhaust pulse pattern that's unlike any other V8. Ford guys will argue their 5.0 sounds better. Mopar guys will defend the 440. But deep down, everyone knows the 350 has the definitive American V8 sound. It's literally the sound people think of when you say V8. Here's something that'll twist your noodle. The 350 influenced engines that weren't even made by GM. When Toyota was developing the UZ Series V8 for Lexus, they benchmarked it against the 350. When BMW built their first V8 in decades, they studied 350s to understand durability. There's documented proof that Ferrari engineers bought 350s to study their production techniques. The humble Chevy small block influenced exotic car development. Let that sink in. Predictably, the 350 also became the most cloned engine in history. Chinese companies make complete knockoff 350s that are dimensionally identical to GM units. Some are actually decent quality. There's a company in Brazil that makes 350s under license that are technically better than the originals because they use modern metallurgy. The 350 has been copied so many times that nobody really knows how many exist worldwide. The military applications are equally fascinating. The 350 powered everything from generators to patrol boats. The Navy SEALs used boats with twin 350s because they could fix them anywhere in the world. The Army had 350 powered generators in Desert Storm that ran for months in sandstorms without failing. There's even a rumor that the CIA used 350 powered boats for operations in Southeast Asia because they could source parts locally. But wait, there's more about the aircraft conversions. Some absolute madman in Alaska put a 350 in a de Havilland Beaver. For those who don't know, that's a bush plane designed for a radial engine. He used a reduction drive and a constant speed prop, and it actually worked brilliantly. The engine weighed less than the original radial and made more power. Transport Canada was not amused, but the FAA actually approved it for experimental category. There's video of this thing taking off in like 200 feet. Meanwhile, in Australia, they were putting 350s in everything from land speed cars to irrigation pumps. The Aussies actually developed some of the best 350 hop-up parts in the world because they couldn't easily import American speed parts. Yellow Terraheads, for example, were specifically designed for 350s and made more power than anything from the States. Some pro stock teams in the U.S. were secretly running Australian parts because they were that good. Fast forward to today, and the 350 still influences modern engine design. The new LT engines share the same bore spacing as the 350. The aftermarket support means you can still build a 350 that makes more power than a new Corvette engine for half the price. There are companies developing billet blocks that accept 350 parts but can handle 2,000 horsepower. The 350 refuses to die because it's just too good at what it does. The economic impact is staggering. The 350 created an entire industry. Speed shops, machine shops, cam grinders, piston manufacturers, thousands of businesses exist solely because of this engine. If the 350 disappeared tomorrow, the aftermarket would lose billions in revenue. Some economists estimate the 350 has generated over $100 billion in economic activity since 1967. That's more than the GDP of some countries. Now here's something wild about emissions. The 350 was supposed to be killed by emissions regulations multiple times. 1975, 1981, 1990, 1996. Each time, GM engineers figured out how to make it cleaner without sacrificing reliability. The throttle body injection system from the 80s was ugly as sin but worked. The Vortec updates made it cleaner than engines half its size. By 2000, a 350 produced fewer emissions than a 1970 economy car, engineering determination at its finest. The cultural impact goes beyond just cars. The 350 became a metaphor for American ingenuity. Simple, powerful, reliable, adaptable. It powered the muscle car era, survived the malaise era, thrived in the truck boom, and influenced the modern performance renaissance. Movies, TV shows, songs. The 350 is everywhere in American culture. When people say, drop a small block in it, everyone knows they mean a 350. Here's the real kicker about why it's in everything. It's not just because it's good. It's because it created its own ecosystem. Every mechanic knows how to work on them. Every parts store stocks parts. Every machine shop has the tools. Every junkyard has cores. The 350 succeeded because it became infrastructure. It's not just an engine. It's an institution. Perhaps the most shocking secret is that GM never expected any of this. The 350 was supposed to be a stopgap engine until something better came along. They thought it would last maybe 5 years in production. Instead, it lasted 36 years and created an entire industry. Sometimes the best products are the ones nobody planned for. The modification potential is absolutely insane too. You can make 200 horsepower for economy or 2,000 horsepower for racing from the same basic architecture. You can run it on gasoline, alcohol, methanol, propane, or natural gas. Naturally aspirated, turbocharged, supercharged, or nitrous. It doesn't care. Air-cooled, water-cooled, oil-cooled, it'll survive. No other engine in history has proven so adaptable to different applications and fuels. But here's something most people overlook: the 350's role in education. Millions of mechanics learned their trade on 350s. High school auto shops, community colleges, technical schools, they all used 350s because they were cheap, simple, and plentiful. Every mechanic over 40 can rebuild a 350 blindfolded. This created a massive knowledge base that perpetuated the engine's dominance. When everyone knows how to fix something, It becomes the default choice. The racing development is particularly interesting. The 350 was never designed as a race engine, but racers made it one through sheer determination. They figured out that the stock Chevy head design flowed poorly but responded incredibly well to porting. They discovered that the stock rotating assembly was good for 7,000 RPM if you just added better bolts. They learned that the block could handle nitrous oxide that would destroy purpose-built race engines. Every discovery was shared, building a collective knowledge base that turned a passenger car engine into a racing legend. You want to know the ultimate proof of the 350's dominance? Ford guys put them in Mustangs. Yeah, you heard that right. There are Fox body Mustangs running around with 350 power because their owners wanted reliability and parts availability. There are forums dedicated to this swap. Ford people choosing Chevy power. If that's not total victory, I don't know what is. The international reach is mind-boggling too. There are 350s in Russian patrol boats, South African mine trucks, and Japanese drift cars. The Middle East uses them in oil field equipment. Antarctica has 350 powered generators at research stations. There's probably a 350 running somewhere on every continent right now. It's the AK-47 of engines, simple, reliable, and everywhere. So what's the biggest secret about the 350? It's that there are no secrets left. Everything about this engine has been discovered, documented, and optimized. Every possible combination has been tried. Every weakness has been found and fixed. Every strength has been exploited. And yet people keep finding new ways to make them better, faster, stronger. The 350 isn't just an engine anymore. It's a platform for infinite creativity. Looking back, the 350's success wasn't about being the best at any one thing. It wasn't the most powerful, the most efficient, or the most advanced. It succeeded by being good enough at everything while being simple enough for anyone to understand. In a world obsessed with complexity, the 350 proved that simple and reliable beats complicated and fragile every single time. The fact is, the 350 changed everything because it democratized performance. Before the 350, hot rodding was for rich guys or mechanical geniuses. The 350 made it possible for any kid with a wrench and determination to build something fast. It leveled the playing field and created a culture that still exists today. Every modern car enthusiast owes something to the 350, whether they know it or not. That's probably the real tragedy. Kids today don't understand what we've lost. Modern engines are technical marvels, but they're not accessible. You can't rebuild a direct injection Turbo 4 in your garage. You can't modify it without a laptop and software. The 350 represented mechanical freedom, the ability to understand, modify, and improve your machine with your own hands. That's gone now, and we're poorer for it. Maybe that's why the 350 refuses to die. It represents something bigger than just an engine. It's a connection to a time when things made sense, when you could fix what broke, when determination mattered more than money. Every time someone builds a 350, they're not just building an engine, they're keeping a tradition alive. And honestly, part of me hopes it never truly dies. In a world of black box electronics and planned obsolescence, the 350 stands as a monument to doing things right the first time. It's proof that good engineering is timeless, that simplicity is its own form of sophistication, and that sometimes the old ways really are the best ways.